As dawn's first light pierced the morning mist of June 6, 1944, the world held its breath. The air over the English Channel was thick with anticipation, as Allied forces prepared to make their historic assault on the heavily fortified coast of Normandy. Operation Overlord, an intricate and expansive invasion plan, had been years in the making and would mark a decisive turning point in the Second World War. The architects of this audacious plan had painstakingly analyzed every possible tactical permutation, each contingent that could arise, while German commanders, confident and often arrogant in their defensive preparations, had fortified their positions, convinced that an attack across the Channel was a distant fantasy. In the weeks leading up to D-Day, Allied intelligence sorties, often dubbed the most dangerous flights of the war, gathered critical information about German defenses. Under the command of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, a multinational coalition was formed, including British, American, Canadian, and numerous other Allied forces. They coordinated an elaborate deception operation, Operation Fortitude, to mislead German High Command into believing that the main assault would target Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy. This ingenious ruse created openings for the Allies to amass the greatest armada the world had ever seen, with over 5,000 ships and vessels poised to land on the French beaches. The German defenses, known as the Atlantic Wall, were no ordinary fortifications. Spanning over 1,500 miles from Norway to France, this series of bunkers, mines, and obstacles was designed to deter any Allied invasion. German General Erwin Rommel, commanding the defense in Normandy, had recognized the necessity for strong defensive positions, but ultimately could not overcome the sheer scale of the Allied invasion. His belief that the Allies would aim for a quick, pinpoint attack led him to underestimate the capacity and determination of the invading forces. Despite his concerns about the lack of troop presence and his numerous requests for additional reinforcements, the German High Command remained skeptical and slow to react. As dawn broke on D-Day, the assault commenced with a relentless aerial bombardment intended to cripple German defenses and disrupt communications. However, the effectiveness of this preemptive strike was drastically reduced by adverse weather conditions, which had kept Allied aircraft grounded during critical planning phases. The first wave of American and British troops, landing on beaches codenamed Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, and Sword, encountered fierce resistance that took many by surprise. They faced artillery fire from high bluffs overlooking the beaches, machine guns, and an array of well-hidden coastal defenses, dubbed Drachenzähne, or Dragon's Teeth, designed to thwart landing craft. At Omaha Beach, American forces were met with such intense fire that their assault became a textbook study in chaos and valor. Waves of young men, having trained for this moment, surged onto the beach, only to be mowed down as they attempted to make their way through the deadly crossfire. Among them was Corporal Thomas A. Niblock, whose regiment suffered near total casualties before his eyes. He exemplified the determination of the average soldier. Despite dropping to the ground as bullets whistled overhead, he rallied fellow soldiers to push on, giving everything they had, even as hope began to dim within their hearts. The initial losses at Omaha Beach often overshadowed the bravery and strategic prowess demonstrated elsewhere on the beaches. At Utah Beach, in contrast, American forces faced comparatively lighter resistance, enabling them to achieve their objectives more effectively. Critical to this success was the rapid decision-making displayed by Major General Norman Cota, whose leadership ensured that his men surged inland quickly to consolidate positions and begin the drive toward linking up with forces at Omaha. The logistical challenges of moving tanks and heavy equipment from landing craft to the beach proved nearly insurmountable during the early hours, necessitating quick adaptation in tactics and resources allocation. The Allies deployed specialized engineering units known as Hobart's Funnies, cleverly designed vehicles that included amphibious tanks equipped with devices such as mine-clearing flails and floating bridges. These innovations, initially met with skepticism, proved invaluable for clearing beach obstacles and providing essential support in storming the heavily defended bunkers held by German forces. Meanwhile, as battalions pushed inland, The logistics of sustaining the invasion took center stage. The establishment of secure supply lines became a matter of life and death. The Red Ball Express, a logistical effort characterized by relentless rounds of truck convoys, began to ferry crucial supplies and reinforcements from the beaches into the heart of France, transforming the tide of war. The day, however, was not without its agonizing moments. For every tactical triumph, there were heart-rending stories of loss. The psychological toll on soldiers who faced the brutal reality of combat, holding their comrades in their arms as life ebbed away, is difficult to quantify yet undeniable. Survivors carried with them the scars of not only physical battles, but also of moral quandaries that haunt soldiers throughout history. Decisions made in the chaos of war, weighing bravery against the instinct for self-preservation, shaped the psyche of a generation forever. Across the English Channel, German commanders were just beginning to grasp the enormity of the invasion. Intelligence reports trickled in, showcasing the fierce resistance on the beaches and the unexpected coordination among Allied forces. General Rommel had predicted a multi-front battle, yet he was heavily constrained by shortages of manpower and delayed orders from his superiors, who were gripped in denial about a full-scale invasion. The scattered remnants of his forces were desperately scrambling to mount effective counterattacks, but the Allied beachhead was expanding exponentially with every passing hour, leaving the German response disorganized. By dusk on June 6, 1944, despite the heavy toll taken on both sides, the Allies had successfully established a foothold on the European mainland. Beaches once haunted by machine gun fire would transform into the emblem of liberation, setting the stage for subsequent operations that would roll back German occupation of France, step by strategic step. The events of D-Day redefined military tactics and showcased the resilience and valor of each individual soldier. The reality of war is often described in strategies and analyses of command decisions, but at its core lies the indefinable human spirit, the spirit of those who fought, fell, and ultimately built a bridge toward freedom through sheer determination in the face of overwhelming odds. Amidst the chaos, the day would forever serve as a potent reminder that the tide of steel that landed on the beaches of Normandy was as much a testament to the heart's resolve as it was to military might. As the sun set on June 6, 1944, the beaches of Normandy bore witness to a monumental shift in the landscape of warfare. The invasion, codenamed Operation Overlord, was not merely a military operation, but a calculated gambit steeped in strategic innovation, deception, and overwhelming human will. Each wave of Allied soldiers was a meticulous piece of a broader chess game, where tactics derived from intelligence reports, aerial reconnaissance, and the daring exploits of commandos converged to create an unprecedented military engagement. The Allies had meticulously prepared for this day for months, employing subterfuge and misdirection to mislead German forces regarding the exact timing and location of the assault. Central to this strategy was the concept of joint operations, wherein air, land, and naval forces worked in a concerted effort to achieve predominance over the battlefield. Allied commanders, led by General Dwight D. Eisenhower, understood the necessity for synchronized assaults on multiple fronts to dilute German reinforcements and response capabilities. In tandem, the paratroopers of the 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions were dispatched to secure vital points inland, disrupting German communications and troop movements before the beach landings commenced. This high-stakes gamble, the byproduct of meticulous planning and audacious vision, was quickly put to the test against the harsh realities of aerial bombardment's unpredictability and the fortified German defenses along the coast. The German fortifications, known as the Atlantic Wall, were formidable. Engineers had erected coastal artillery points, machine gun nests, and vast networks of trenches and barbed wire that would challenge even the most resilient attackers. German infantry, particularly units from the 352nd Infantry Division stationed at Omaha Beach, were prepared. Having studied Allied tactics, they knew to expect relentless assaults and had received last-minute reinforcements despite the logistical strains hampering communication and supply. The The commanders on the ground had laid down their own plans, the directives dictated by the grand strategies of the Nazi High Command. Yet what they first encountered on D-Day went beyond any previous engagements. It was an onslaught that shattered expectations and morale, turning the calculated German defenses into chaotic reactionary responses. The landings began shortly after midnight, with paratroopers scattering into the darkness over Normandy. Their mission was nearly Sisyphean. Despite a well-orchestrated drop scheme, unforeseen winds displaced many from their designated zones, leading to disoriented units and fractured communications. Nevertheless, as the first glimmers of dawn broke over the horizon, thousands of boats helmed by Allied sailors approached the heavily mined beaches. The toll was immediate and devastating. As soldiers disembarked, some found themselves engulfed in the lethal fire of machine guns, grappling with the overwhelming terror of the moment. A fear mingled with desperation and an unwavering commitment to fulfill their roles. Among the Allied forces on Omaha Beach was Private First Class Ralph M. McMahon, who would later recount his harrowing experience. As he struggled through knee-deep water, the deafening sounds of gunfire echoed around him, and fellow soldiers began to fall. It is estimated that within the first 15 minutes of landing at Omaha, over 1,000 men were either killed or severely injured. The German positions, entrenched behind the formidable structures of concrete bunkers and covered trenches, became a deadly vanguard against the approaching tide of Allied forces. McMahon, along with others, relied heavily on their basic training. The instinct for survival eclipsed fear as they pressed on, determined to breach the enemy's defenses. Further along the coast, at Utah Beach, a different scene unfolded. Although still fierce, the resistance was less intense, and elements of the 4th Infantry Division found themselves making more rapid progress. The disparate experiences of the two landing zones speak volumes about the unpredictable chaos of warfare, which often renders even the best-laid plans to disparate outcomes. Commanders on the beach were faced not only with physical opposition, but also the challenge of instantaneously altering strategies, navigating the murky waters of tactical decision-making amidst cascading uncertainty. The decentralized structure of the Allied command meant that the sergeants and lieutenants on the ground had to employ their initiative quickly, adapting to rapidly evolving situations without waiting for orders that might never come due to destroyed communications. As the day unfolded, the challenge for the Germans was to mount any effective counteroffensive. The heavy toll inflicted by the sustained Allied bombardments prior to the landings had indeed crippled their ability to respond effectively in real time. Reports from the field revealed a disarray that was palpable. Communication lines had been severed, and tanks and reinforcements were caught in transit amid the wreckage of previous engagements. Despite the bravery demonstrated by many in the Wehrmacht, the initial shock and confusion thwarted their potential to mount a coordinated counterattack that could have turned the tide back in favor of the Axis. By the end of D-Day, the price paid for every inch of ground claimed was staggering. Allied forces did not merely bear the burden of bullets and bombs. They also carried the psychological weight of loss and witness. The soldiers faced a myriad of emotions: elation at achieving a foothold, dread at the losses suffered, and the dawning realization that the fight was far from over. Within this cauldron of war, the resilience of the human spirit glimmered through the chaos, revealing tales of camaraderie and valor. It was not just a struggle for territory, but a fight for survival. The strategic implications of D-Day rippled far beyond the shores of Normandy, marking a decisive turning point in the war. The establishment of a solid Allied presence in Europe laid the groundwork for subsequent campaigns that would lead to the liberation of France and ultimately culminate in the collapse of Nazi Germany. As site after site in Europe reported heroism born from desperation, the stories emerging from this chapter of history transcended borders and generations. The veterans, haunted yet proud, became the vessels of memories too heavy for history books alone. Their sacrifices, etched in the fibers of collective conscience, would serve as solemn reminders of the cost of freedom. The Allied forces had defied the odds and secured a foothold that would serve as a catalyst in the larger narrative of the Second World War. However, As they began to advance into occupied territory, they carried with them the crushing weight of the casualties, the nuance of moral dilemmas, and the haunting echoes of the battles still to come. The tide of steel that landed on the beaches of Normandy was not just an invasion. It was humanity's response to tyranny, an assertion of fierce determination against the backdrop of despair. As we delve deeper into this vast theater of conflict, let us not only recall the strategies executed and battles fought, but also the lives forever altered, the families torn apart, and the enduring spirit that emerged from the crucible of war. Join us as we continue to explore the layers of this momentous event, and if you feel compelled by the stories of bravery and sacrifice, subscribe for more insights and share your thoughts in the comments. Let us together honor the legacies of those who endured when history beckoned with its stinging call to arms. As dawn broke on June 6, 1944, the horizon off the coast of Normandy shimmered like molten lead, masking the gravity of the impending invasion. An intricate ballet of logistics, strategy, and raw human will converged to forge what would become known as D-Day. Allied forces, comprising American, British, Canadian, and numerous other national contingents, faced not only the German military might entrenched along the coast, but also the psychological burdens of uncertainty and dread, daunting obstacles that loomed equally large in the minds of commanders and foot soldiers alike. The German High Command, buoyed by the belief that the English Channel provided an insurmountable barrier, underestimated both the resolve of their adversaries and the meticulous planning that had been unfolding behind the veil of secrecy. The Allies' Operation Overlord harnessed several years of combined intelligence, resources, and anticipation, designed to breach the heavily fortified Atlantic Wall, an intricate network of defenses that extended across the French coastline, culminating in an extensive array of bunkers, artillery positions, and minefields aimed at repelling any amphibious incursion. Sitting at the center of this monumental undertaking was General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who, with the code name Operation Neptune, orchestrated thousands of ships, planes, and troops in a truly unprecedented coalition effort. The landings at Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, and Sword Beaches began just after midnight on June 6th, commencing with a bombing campaign to destroy enemy fortifications and soften defenses. In a dramatic show of aerial might, thousands of Allied bombers were dispatched to obliterate strategic targets across the Normandy region. Dance macabre on the ground ensued, as the steep cliffs and vast stretches of sand transformed into grim battlefields. However, the bombers frequently miscalculated their paths due to poor visibility, resulting in a tragic and unintended consequence: the loss of countless Allied lives even before troops set foot on the beaches. With artillery shells cascading onto friendly positions as well as German bunkers, the initial phase of invasion faced a brutal reckoning, highlighted by the harrowing reports from the ground. Among the American forces which bore the brunt of the assault at Omaha Beach, the initial landings proved catastrophic. Waves of soldiers poured onto the blood-soaked sand, only to be met with a hail of gunfire from German machine gun nests nestled within entrenched cliffs, a testament to the tactical advantages the Germans held. The death toll was staggering, with some estimates indicating that nearly 2,000 American soldiers were either killed or wounded within the first few hours. The chaos was palpable. Among the cacophony of explosions and despair, young men struggled against the tide of water and the collective paralysis engendered by fear, with the ocean itself serving as a treacherous barrier. The harrowing images of comrades pulling each other from the surf, struggling to maintain air while laden down by heavy gear, emerged as unspeakable symbols of valor and tragedy, threading the fabric of shared adversity that would forever bind those who survived. As embattled troops fought their way off the beaches, and amid all the confusion, some units made use of sheer grit and extraordinary acts of courage, maneuvering through minefields and ravaging gunfire to establish footholds in the enemy's defenses. One such figure was Captain Richard Winters of Easy Company, whose leadership exemplified adaptation under fire. He urged his men forward, employing small group tactics that sought to exploit gaps in the German defenses while simultaneously preserving unit cohesion. Winters emphasized the need for rapid assault and movement. Move as fast as you can, and when you see an opening, take it. His words, valorized amidst chaos, reflected an essential shift in battlefield doctrine, embracing initiative over constraint, a tactic that reverberated through the ranks. Supporting infantry, including the airborne divisions parachuted behind enemy lines, played vital roles in seizing critical resource points and disrupting German communication. Indeed, the presence of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions led to a series of disorienting strikes throughout the day, drawing German forces away from main landing areas. The airborne drops, however, were not without their blunders. Many paratroopers landed miles away from their intended drop zones, compounding an already tense operational environment. This randomness in the initial movements highlighted the challenges of coordinating a multi-domain assault. Yet even amidst the confusion, mounting acts of heroism shone brightly. Soldiers who found each other in the chaos banded together to achieve strategic ends against overwhelming odds. By noon, even as battle raged at Omaha, successes were achieved elsewhere, particularly at Utah Beach, where American forces met far less resistance. Commanders learned that strong naval and air bombardments had effectively reduced coastal fortifications following initial assaults. This minor victory fueled hope for unity among the wavering Allied elements. However, it was imperative to secure deep-water ports to facilitate the influx of supplies and reinforcements necessary for the ongoing campaign. With each hour that passed, the importance of the captured territory became starkly apparent. The advancement towards Paris depended heavily on the fusion of logistical sustainability with operational efficiency, requiring careful measurements of troop movements, supply lines, and morale. As dusk descended on the battlefield, a far-reaching realization began to set in. The tide of steel that had landed, though battered and bloodied, managed to breach the formidable wall of Axis fortifications. The Allies had established beachheads, enabling them to escalate their advance inland, but it came at an immense cost. Thousands were falling, their dreams extinguished in a torrent of violence. The human toll reverberated through family and community networks, resonating profoundly with those left behind. As reports filtered back to the United States and beyond, it echoed the multitude of individual sacrifices: fathers, sons, brothers, those who had been offered up on the altar of freedom. With the initial landings a grim yet necessary success, the Allies faced the pressing challenge of consolidating their positions in the tight confines of the French countryside, determined to follow through on the underpinnings of Operation Overlord. The advancing lines of Allied forces encountered not only physical barriers, but also fortified German counteroffensives that sowed uncertainty among ranks. Understanding the necessity of robust supply chains and the integration of air, naval, and ground forces was critical for maintaining momentum. Generals Owningsworth and Montgomery contended with the remnants of German resistance, utilizing mechanized divisions to push towards key objectives. Yet the steady march towards victory was precarious. Each advance bore the heavy weight of human cost, manifesting as harrowing stories of loss and endurance, resonating deeply within the troops who pressed on through the ashes of battle. Simultaneously, the gradual erosion of enemy morale became increasingly evident. Reports from the front line showcased a shifting tide in perception. German forces, initially entrenched in the belief that they could effectively repel the invaders, began to grapple with glimpses of inevitable defeat. The widening fissures in German defenses not only signified a stratagem falling apart, but also unveiled chinks in the ideological armor surrounding the Nazi regime itself. The echoes of despair found their way back to Berlin, where commanders questioned their tactical assessments and the efficacy of their once unassailable Atlantic Wall. In the relentless pursuit of freedom, the Allies not only fought against fortified positions, but rallied against the relentless tide of history. As the dust from those initial landings settled, whispers of courage and resolve woven through despair formed an indelible tapestry, showcasing the power of collective action in the face of brutality. Each wave of possibility forged anew from the lessons learned in the rivers of steel. The fight for Normandy was not merely a chapter in a larger war. It epitomized the struggle for the soul of humanity, a stark reminder that, in the darkest of times, the light persists through acts of bravery, resilience, and unity. As the weeks unfolded following the D-Day landings, the Allied commanders faced an increasingly complex battleground. Each decision made in the heat of evolving circumstances was laden with implications, as they needed to adapt to the enemy's tactical maneuvers and logistical challenges. Amidst the chaos, the focus shifted to the logistics of sustaining an expansive front, while also anticipating German counterattacks that could unravel their fragile hold on the beachheads. The intricate web of supply lines, known as the Red Ball Express, emerged as a linchpin element for the Allies, ushering vital resources through a landscape bedeviled by remnants of conflict. Strategically, the Allies capitalized on air superiority, which had been firmly established through the combined efforts of the Royal Air Force and the United States Army Air Forces. Air cover provided not only the necessary reconnaissance, but also facilitated tactical bombing runs against supply depots and reinforcements en route to the front lines. The precision of these operations underscored a paradigm shift in modern warfare, where different branches of the military coordinated their actions to create a cohesive fighting force. Yet the grim reality that accompanied this aerial advantage was manifested on the ground, where soldiers from both sides endured the continuous threat of artillery barrages, sniper fire, and the omnipresent specter of mechanized warfare. With the Allies securing the beaches, General Dwight D. Eisenhower and his staff recognized the urgency of consolidating their gains and expanding their foothold. Operation Cobra was initiated to break out from the confines of the beachhead. This operation featured a combined arms approach, utilizing airstrikes to soften up German defenses prior to a ground offensive. Eisenhower's reliance on air power for strategic advantage came at a significant humanitarian cost, as towns, villages, and civilian lives were caught in a relentless storm of munitions. Consequently, the bulldozing nature of these assaults ignited discussions about the ethics surrounding warfare. The justification for tactical gains frequently collided with the tragic reality of civilian suffering. Behind the lines, tensions mounted as commanders like Generals Bradley and Patton pushed for accelerated advancements through the French countryside. Underlying their haste was a palpable fear: the need to sever Nazi supply chains before reinforcements could be diverted to repair the crumbling Atlantic Wall. As the Allies advanced, the stage was set for asymmetrical warfare, where the ability to seize and hold territory had to contend with the deeply ingrained German military doctrine that emphasized counteroffensives rather than static defense. In this theater, fighting morale became almost as critical as the availability of weaponry, with both sides acutely aware of the psychological toll combat inflicted on soldiers. The human dimension of warfare became particularly striking as the Allies pushed further into Normandy. Soldiers gripped tightly onto fading letters from home, while traversing bombed-out villages that showed whispers of a once vibrant existence. Each new day disoriented them, often blending into a haze of combat and camaraderie tinged with the sorrow of lost comrades. Communication from the front lines revealed an intricate tapestry of friendships forged in fire. Strangers becoming brothers in arms, each man relying on another for survival in the cacophonous din of battle. The heartbreak grew heavier as familiar faces were lost, each marked by a name etched into hallowed ground. Meanwhile, in the German ranks, commanders like Field Marshal Erwin Rommel faced mounting difficulty in preserving their defenses. Reports filtering in from various sectors told tales of dwindling supplies, divisions stretched thin, and morale plummeting with every foot of ground lost. The once sturdy fortifications of the Atlantic Wall, allegedly brimming with unparalleled might, now crumbled against the well-orchestrated assault of the Allies. After fierce engagements around Caen, it became apparent that the Germans could no longer maintain a sustainable defense against an enemy whose numbers swelled as reinforcements continued to pour into France. The stark reality forced German commanders to consider the desperate option of retreating, as the front lines threatened to collapse under the weight of relentless attacks. As July unfurled, the long-awaited breakout from the beachhead became a reality. The liberation of St. Lo served as the keystone to the Allied advance, punctuated by tank battalions rolling into the town amidst a chorus of cheers from liberated civilians. However, the victory came at a high cost, as lives were sacrificed on the battlefield, and the logistical nightmare of pursuing a retreating enemy began to unfold. Coordination challenges arose within the fragmented command structure, where rapid advances created inefficiencies in supply routes and muddled communications strained outward support efforts. In Berlin, the atmosphere shifted dramatically as despair crept through the channels of Nazi leadership. Adolf Hitler's increasingly erratic decisions and insistence on consolidating retreating forces only exacerbated the problems at the front. Down in the ranks, German soldiers found themselves grappling with conflicting orders, often assigned to defend against overwhelming Allied advances even in areas deemed hopeless. Stripped of support and positioned in fortifications stripped bare of ammunition, many German troops faced ethical dilemmas that arose from their commitment to the regime versus the palpable reality of their untenable situation. This confluence of warfare strategy, logistical stamina, and human suffering coalesced in a manner that underscored not merely a contest of military might, but the profound human experience at large. Each advance and loss molded a narrative revealing the struggle against tyranny, illuminating the raw emotions driving soldiers to confront the specters of fear and loss. The chaotic patchwork of survival, camaraderie, and retribution manifested itself amidst twisted metal and devastated landscapes, revealing the deeper truths of a conflict that transcended mere geography. Normandy had become a crucible, testing the mettle of commanders and soldiers alike, a place where the echoes of gunfire intertwined with resilience, creating myths for the ages. As the Allies moved forward with bloody determination, it became clear that the fight for liberation was not just a military campaign, but a relentless journey into the heart of humanity itself, ever reminding those embroiled in the struggle that, while they fought for land and power, the true battle lay in the restoration of dignity and freedom for all who had suffered under the oppressive yoke of tyranny. As the first light of dawn broke over the crumbling coastal defenses of Normandy on June 6, 1944, the German commanders stood resolute in their fortified bunkers, convinced of their ability to repel the impending Allied invasion. Unknown to them, the stage was already set for what would be one of the most significant turning points in the Second World War. The Allies, meticulously planning for Operation Overlord for months, had assembled an unprecedented force of over 156,000 troops, coupled with 5,000 ships and countless aircraft, all aimed at breaching the heavily entrenched German positions along the beaches. However, for all the might present on the opposing side, the Germans underestimated the Allies' collective will, organizational mastery, and the harsh realities of combined arms warfare. Tactically, the German High Command operated with a strategy steeped in static defense, bolstered by formidable fortifications known as the Atlantic Wall. This series of coastal defenses, constructed under the supervision of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, consisted of concrete bunkers outfitted with heavy artillery, minefields, and obstacles designed to slow enemy assaults. Nevertheless, as the Allies prepared their aerial bombardments and amphibious landings, intelligence gaps and underestimation of operational timelines plagued the German response. The failure of German reconnaissance, coupled with the Allies' elaborate deception campaigns like Operation Bodyguard, created a false sense of security for the defenders. Rommel's insistence on maintaining a flexible defense, placing mobile armored divisions closer to the coast, would ultimately become a footnote in the greater narrative of a static and inflexible command structure that weakened the German response at every critical juncture. On the morning of D-Day, thousands of Allied troops made their way towards the shores of Normandy, faced with the impending barrage of German firepower. Sitting atop the cliffs that loomed over Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches, German gunners awaited the order to unleash their fury. Despite their extensive preparations, The fortifications at these key landing zones often did not achieve peak readiness. Some bunkers were unmanned or had miscommunications regarding ammunition supplies. As Allied landing craft drew nearer, heavy naval bombardments commenced, raining destruction upon enemy positions and leaving many German soldiers feeling abandoned, encased in concrete tombs. The ripple effect of these early tremors in the conflict disrupted not only the defensive lines, but also clouded the decisions of commanders who were already hesitant due to conflicting orders from higher echelons. The loss of communication was particularly pronounced at Omaha Beach, where American units faced near-catastrophic losses against the fierce German defense coordinated by the 352nd Infantry Division. For the German defenders, the initial artillery fire from the Navy was both a harbinger and a respite. While the pounding from above certainly highlighted the incoming invasion, it also allowed them to conserve ammunition and maintain focus on their primary mission, to repulse the enemy at all costs. But as the sun rose higher on that fateful day, it became clear that their preconceptions of combat would soon be shattered. As American forces emerged from their landing craft, they encountered withering fire that forced them to take cover on the beaches, now drenched in blood and desperation. Down on the sand, chaos reigned supreme. Soldiers, clad in the drab colors of their uniforms, found themselves confronting not only the physical barriers imposed by the German forces, but also psychological obstacles. The screams of the wounded, the cacophony of gunfire, and the relentless fear of encroaching death wove together into a horror that seeped into the hearts of both Allies and Axis alike. For every soldier embarking upon the shores of Normandy, the collective memory of their preparation and anticipation clashed violently with their immediate visceral reality. Many faced moral quandaries, born not only from the fear of failure, but from the recognition that their fight carried with it the echoes of past transgressions, being forced to wage war upon fellow human beings, compounded by the dire consequences of a conquering regime. The consequences of battle, however, extend far beyond the immediate skirmishes along the beaches. As dawn turned into early afternoon, the German command structure began to flounder under the sheer weight of escalating chaos. Orders became increasingly tangled, reflecting the fractured state of leadership amid the unexpected ferocity of the Allied assault. Troops intended to reinforce front lines instead found themselves embroiled in desperate attempts to regroup and mount a coherent defense against the onslaught. As loss burgeoned, the moral weight of command etched deeper lines of despair across the faces of those resolute Wehrmacht officers who believed in swift victory, but were confronted with the grim specter of loss. On the Allied side, the impact of Normandy's battle forged a new spirit of unity and resolve among troops. The relentless trek forward was not merely a mission to secure a foothold in Europe, but a visceral affirmation of hope and liberation for occupied nations. As each soldier pushed through the sand and wound their way into the line of fire, they embodied a collective ethos, one that underscored the values of freedom, dignity, and the imperative to confront tyranny. Camaraderie blossomed amidst chaos, where bonds forged under the harshest of conditions delved beyond mere survival. They transformed into steadfast connections that would last a lifetime. In these moments, crucial tactical adaptations and the blood of camaraderie led to critical victories. Coordinated air, artillery, and infantry efforts began overwhelming German strongholds, leading to significant breakthroughs. With control gradually shifting, the Allied forces pressed on, infiltrating further into enemy lines, dismantling previously formidable defenses, and beginning to seize strategic high ground. By the end of D-Day, despite staggering losses, an estimated 4,400 Allied troops killed, missing, or wounded, the Allies had made significant gains, irrevocably altering the landscape of the war. Yet amid these advancements, the human cost remained an indelible mark upon the narrative of that day. Soldiers, once filled with dreams of homecoming, were now left grappling with scars that extended beyond the physical realm. Psychological implications lingered long after the echoes of gunfire faded. Each battle honed the understanding that the conflict transcended mere territorial acquisition, It became evident that the struggle against tyranny was as much about personal liberation as it was about restructuring the geopolitical map of Europe. The operations turned into an all-encompassing challenge, demanding sacrifices that would resonate through subsequent generations. As time progressed, the hard lessons learned on D-Day served to refine military strategies and adapt leadership protocols within both the Allied and Axis forces. The wise and the weary alike began to understand that war is not merely fought through the application of might or the execution of tactics, but through the hearts and souls entwined in the struggle for existence and freedom. Each commander, each soldier, not only wrestled with their own destinies, but also with a larger narrative, one that shaped humanity's resilience, its capacity for suffering, and ultimately, its relentless pursuit of justice. In the shadows of this grand historical tapestry, the question remains, what are we, as historians and documentarians, to learn from the echoes of Normandy? What stories yet untold beg for our attention? As we continue to peel back the layers of conflict, we must remain attuned not only to the strategies and operations that define battles, but also to the courage and complexity in every human soul that contributed to shaping our world. By subscribing to our channel, you ensure that these essential narratives continue to be shared and explored. Is there a particular battle or theme you wish to delve into next? Let us know your suggestions and join us in uncovering the untold stories of history. In the early hours of June 6, 1944, the beaches of Normandy were transformed into a theater of warfare that would resonate through history. A convergence of bold military strategies juxtaposed with harrowing human experiences. Under the command of Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Allied forces meticulously devised Operation Overlord, aiming to breach Hitler's formidable Atlantic Wall and reclaim continental Europe from the clutches of Nazi oppression. The assault required not only unparalleled tactical coordination, but also an immense logistical framework designed to support a multifaceted invasion that would stretch from the shores of Omaha and Utah to Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches. Yet the German commanders, steeped in their own misconceptions of the Allied resolve, prepared to thwart the expected landings, their confidence rooted in a series of fortified positions and an intricate web of defense. The German defenses along the coastline were fortified with a plethora of obstacles and strategically placed artillery, intended to deter any naval bombardment or ground assault. The formidable Atlantic Wall comprised concrete bunkers and machine gun nests bristling with firepower, nestled amidst an array of anti-tank obstacles, the infamous hedgehogs, along with barbed wire, concealed mines, and submerged obstacles that could cripple landing craft. The defensive strategy hinged on speed and communication. Major General Erich von Manstein, who spearheaded the defense in the West, argued for the deployment of reserve forces that could sever the Allied advance. However, the overconfidence of the German High Command, particularly at the hands of Adolf Hitler, resulted in stalled responses, as crucial reserves remained inaccessible. General Rommel, tasked with overseeing coastal defenses, had warned of the dire consequences that would arise from underestimating the Allies, yet struggled against the paralyzing directives from above. As dawn broke, the invasion fleet, which included over 5,000 vessels carrying more than 156,000 troops destined for the beaches, moved toward their predetermined points. The landing assault commenced under the relentless barrage of Allied naval gunfire and aerial bombardment, designed to soften the German defenses. However, the rugged topography, coupled with an unforeseen weather shift, would prove brutal for the Allied forces. Amidst changing tides and poor visibility, many landing craft lost orientation, resulting in Allied soldiers finding themselves either swept off course or facing fortified positions head-on. At Omaha Beach, where the assault ultimately grimly defined the day's narrative, American forces faced an immediate onslaught that was met with devastation unimagined. The narrow stretch of sand, overlooked by cliff faces and fortified emplacements, became a kill zone as German gunners unleashed a storm of bullets, causing catastrophic casualties within the first minutes of landing. The dire situation demanded rapid adaptation. Waves of troops who landed faced chaos amid disorganization. Companies that were meant to flood the beaches were fragmented, relying on individual initiatives to regroup and push forward. Soldiers like Sergeant George Newton epitomized the spirit of resilience birthed from those ashes of despair, rallying men to forge ahead in the face of overwhelming odds, marked by a singular mission: to overcome the enemy's defenses. Yet beyond the physical battles, the psychological strain of warfare became evident. The chaos of Omaha Beach was not merely catalogued as a loss, but as a profound testament to the human spirit's ability to endure, adapt, and inspire. Commanders and privates alike grappled with moments of abject terror against an enemy who knew the terrain intimately. The effort to establish a foothold amidst that hellish theater had both tactical and emotional undercurrents. The realization that valor could sometimes stem not just from victory, but in the act of willing oneself to persist defined the essence of that day. Despite heavy losses, newcomers steadily began to form tenuous beachheads from which further offensives could be launched, a flicker of hope amidst headwinds of despair. With the Allied forces struggling at Omaha, the success of the beach landings relied heavily upon the developments at Utah Beach, where elements of the U.S. 4th Infantry Division made effective use of pre-invasion aerial bombardments that successfully breached German defenses. Strategic coordination by naval artillery vastly differed from the chaos at Omaha. Troops landed near the causeway leading to key road networks essential for the movement of reinforcements. Utilizing well-planned engineering and mobility, commanders were able to capitalize on the situation. Momentum began to build, and with it, the war effort thrust forward toward vital land objectives. Allied forces were not devoid of challenge, however. Supply and logistics faced insurmountable hurdles as tens of thousands of troops moved through contested ground, often facing shortages of ammunition, food, and medical care amid harrowing circumstances. As thousands of troops were poured into Normandy, the necessity for an effective supply chain became paramount. The Mulberry Harbors, artificial floating piers manufactured to facilitate offloading supplies, epitomized the ingenuity of Allied planners who rose to the obstacles posed by rough waters and relentless German artillery. Engineers worked relentlessly to ensure that an uninterrupted flow of supplies sustained the burgeoning Allied presence on the beaches. On the other side of the conflict, the psychological and tactical fallout within German ranks became starkly evident. The German command faced internal communication breakdowns exacerbated by the ferocity of the Allied assault and fluctuating morale. Commanders who had once confidently planned their responses found themselves in an unpredictable battlefield, ultimately jeopardizing the meticulously laid plans of the Third Reich. As the day wore on, the realization dawned upon German commanders that they could no longer rely solely on entrenched positions. Their resilience in the face of the bombardment was strained. Resources became stretched thin, and fortifications began to erode under the relentless onslaught of continuous air and naval strikes. By nightfall on June 6th, the Allies had achieved a mere fraction of their ambitious goals. Yet the very act of establishing a foothold allowed for further operations, Operation Neptune, to receive the necessary reinforcement and supplies. The human cost, staggering as it was, thousands lost lives while many were wounded, became an indelible part of Normandy's legacy. The memories forged amidst the chaos and carnage would go on to create bonds that united the combatants in shared suffering. The tactical and operational assessments made that harrowing day, while crucial for the immediate strategies employed, would ripple through the vast sea of military history as lessons learned in blood, valor, and sacrifice. As historians reflect upon those fateful hours on D-Day, it is recognizable that the events of that single day encompassed not only a military operation of monumental proportions, but a profound exploration into the depth of human warfare. Amidst the spray of gunfire and the crash of artillery, the enduring narratives of courage, desperation, resilience, and sacrifice began to etch their way into the annals of history, a testament to the human condition faced with its most formidable adversaries. The spectrum of bravery and loss on those blood-soaked sands of Normandy forever captured the complex interplay of fate, choice, and endurance, faced by every individual involved in the dawn of liberation. On the dawn of June 6, 1944, the operational landscape of Normandy bore witness to a seismic shift in the theater of war, spurred by Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion that sought to breach Hitler's fortress Europe. The meticulous planning initiated by Allied command spanned years and encompassed not merely military maneuvers, but also an exhaustive deployment of logistical support, intelligence gathering, and psychological warfare aimed at misleading the German High Command. The sheer scale of this operation was reflected in the hallowed code names of its components: Overlord, Neptune, and the steadfast bravery of the soldiers who comprised the landing forces. Yet, as history would record, the realities of combat often deferred to no plan, transforming anticipated victories into agonizing struggles, entrenched in the bloodied soil of Normandy. The strategic significance of the Normandy landings lay in their ability to open a new front against Nazi Germany. Commanders such as General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied Expeditionary Forces, understood that success hinged on a combined arms approach, an amalgamation of naval bombardment to soften the enemy defenses, aerial superiority to control the skies, and the infantry assaults that would form the backbone of any ground offensive. The use of specialized landing crafts, like the Landing Ship Tank, LST, and the Higgins boats, marked a staggering innovation in amphibious warfare, facilitating the transportation of both troops and equipment directly onto the beaches under fire, a necessary evolution from the rigid naval assault methodologies employed in earlier conflicts, where ships would remain offshore, affording little close support. German commanders, however, faced their own tactical dilemmas. The Atlantic Wall, a series of fortifications stretching from the coast of Norway to France, had been designed under the impression that any invasion would occur at high tide during summer months when the weather was favorable. As Allied reconnaissance had predicted, the operations commenced under a new moon, minimizing visibility for the German defenders. The fortifications constructed by the Todt organization, though robust, were often outdated. Many of the commanders relied heavily on fixed positions rather than adaptable troop deployments. The defenses at Omaha Beach, one of the most sanguinary landing sites, were manned by units of the 352nd Infantry Division, reinforced by machine gun nests, anti-tank barriers, and artillery pieces that Commanding Officer General Fritz Bayerlein had strategically emplaced. The Germans were initially taken by surprise. However, as the smoke cleared, the harsh realities of disjointed commands began to surface. In the chaos of battle, it was evident that the entrenched positions of the Germans, though durable, demonstrated static vulnerabilities. Early in the assault, as Allied troops began to breach the shoreline, the Luftwaffe's failure to establish air superiority crippled German response efforts. Allied control of the skies enabled massive air assault coordination, obstructing German reinforcements and preventing timely command decisions. Battleships like the USS Nevada and the HMS Warspite unleashed a bombardment that decimated key defensive positions, though at a harrowing cost. Each wave of Allied forces that landed faced relentless resistance and expectations, surpassed only by the moderating influence of well-coordinated naval strike capabilities. The physical and psychological toll on the soldiers, both Allied and German, should not be underestimated. The terrain, heavily fortified yet treacherously uneven, became a grave for many. Canadian forces landing at Juno Beach encountered fierce resistance, beset by fortified German bunkers that rained fire upon them from entrenched positions. Sustained gunfire and dismembered bodies cluttered the sands. Many soldiers, barely out of their teenage years, were forced to grapple not only with the lethal precision of enemy fire, but also with the collective trauma of witnessing comrades succumb to horrific injuries. The existential weight of survival transformed moments of valor into harrowing memories, the faces of fallen brothers imprinted indelibly in their conscience. Despite the violence that erupted, the Allies managed to establish tenuous beachheads across 5 codenamed sectors: Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, and Sword, although progress varied widely. At Omaha, where losses soared, the lack of naval gunfire support initially left soldiers to fend for themselves amidst heavy defenses. The sight of men struggling, drowning under heavy equipment and the weight of fear drove home the stark reality of human fragility in combat. Meanwhile, resolute leadership by officers like Colonel George Taylor inspired braveries. As the tide turned after the initial setbacks, small units coalesced, using the natural contours of the land to initiate counterattacks. Despite staggering casualties, prevailing tenacity defined the ethos driving the Allied forces through that day, a fighting spirit ignited by the bitter knowledge of what they stood to gain through the crucible of their hardships. As the invasion evolved, logistical lines sprang into action, yet communication remained hampered by the chaotic battlefield conditions. The Allies faced a conundrum. While the objective surrounded seizing key beachheads, sustaining momentum necessitated an ongoing flow of supplies and command coordination. The artificial harbor at Arromanches, known as the Mulberry Harbor, served as a lifeline, allowing for the transportation of vital ammunition, reinforcements, and medical supplies, albeit under the threat of German artillery fire and the unrelenting forces of the English Channel. The staggering scale of logistical requirements would demand not only military, but strategic ingenuity in maintaining the beachheads long past the initial landings. As the sun set on the perilous day, D-Day christened itself in blood, loss, and the remnants of bravado. Though the harrowing losses would pave the way for future operations to unfold, the decisions made on that pivotal day continued to reverberate across timelines and conflicts, enshrined in military doctrine and the inexorable field reports drafted in the wake of the confrontation. The garlands of valor, combined with the haunting specter of loss, amalgamated into a narrative that would shape how future generations understood sacrifice within the machinery of warfare. Ultimately, June 6, 1944, served as a confluence of human determination, stark strategies, and the indelible scars war etches into the psyche of mankind. The shores of Normandy may have served as the physical stage, yet the true battle raged in the hearts and minds of the soldiers. Every bullet fired, life sacrificed, and absurd act of bravery interlinked perpetually within the statistics of war, verging into an ethos of collective courage that would resonate long after the guns fell silent. In the relentless march toward liberation, the struggle on this fateful day signified not merely the tearing of ground from occupation, but a profound exploration of humanity's capacity for both destruction and resilience, forever etched into the annals of history. As the dawn broke on the morning following the landings, the Allied forces found themselves entrenched within a dynamic landscape of chaos marked by burnt earth and the ravages of constant conflict. The initial assault had established a fragile foothold on Normandy's beaches, Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, and Sword. Yet the battle was far from over. Commanders on both sides now engaged in a grim contest of wills, with the Allies tasked with consolidating their positions against a formidable German defense that was still partially intact despite the successes of D-Day. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme commander of the Allied expeditionary forces, faced the monumental task of orchestrating a sustained offensive amidst both logistical constraints and the psychological toll the previous day had imparted on his troops. Each beachhead became a focal point of strategy, dictating the operational tempo that would either lead to victory or chaos. The German Wehrmacht, buoyed by years of militaristic experience and the expert deployment strategies honed during the Blitzkrieg campaigns, transformed the landscape into a fortress. Utilizing the natural topography, the Germans established an intricate network of fortifications known as the Atlantic Wall, an extensive defensive arrangement combined with artillery positions, machine gun nests, and fortified bunkers. The strategic architecture relied not only on concrete and steel, but also on the fierce resolve of the soldiers defending it, many of whom were experienced combat veterans who understood the implications of this battle on the broader European theater. Commanded by General Erich von Manstein and Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, The German forces adhered to a tactical doctrine that prioritized rapid counterattacks and tactical withdrawals to preserve strength, while maintaining a relentless pressure on Allied advances. As the Allies attempted to secure their positions, they encountered a symphony of defensive firepower. The Atlantic Wall's artillery pounded the beachhead, and sniper fire rained down from fortified positions that were often cleverly concealed from the advancing forces. The Allies quickly realized that their air superiority, though initially overwhelming, was under constant pressure from German anti-aircraft units, which managed to disrupt the supply lines needed for artillery, ammunition, and reinforcement to reach the front lines. This ongoing contest of control emphasized the importance of air cover and the combined arms approach the Allies sought to employ. Overhead, the ominous drones of aircraft illustrated the duality of power. While they could rain chaos upon the enemy, the gains made with aerial support were precarious and could be siphoned off by aggressive German anti-aircraft defenses. Meanwhile, logistical considerations loomed large over the battlefield. The initial landing required an extraordinary influx of supplies, armor, fuel, food, and medical care, for the casualty toll that escalated with alarming rapidity. To sustain the operations across the beaches, the Allies implemented Operation Neptune, a supplementary initiative designed to ensure that the flow of resources was continuous. The Mulberry harbors, hastily constructed floating piers, emerged as critical lifelines for getting the necessary supplies ashore. However, strong currents and deteriorating weather conditions introduced additional challenges, forcing engineers to improvise and adapt in real time. The twin Mulberries at Arromanches and Omaha Beach underwent relentless scrutiny, symbolizing both the ingenuity of Allied logistics and the weight of expectation that hung over those who operated them. As troops pushed inland, the sacrifices made on the beaches began to reveal their strategic worth. However, those initial gains were met with bitter resistance. In a specific theater of conflict around Caen, an important city that had emerged as a vital objective, the Allies found themselves ensnared in a grinding engagement that tested the limits of their ability to coordinate combined arms operations against a well-entrenched enemy. British and Canadian forces engaged in fierce urban warfare in a bid to clear the German presence, while simultaneously sustaining the significant losses that came with head-on confrontations in the alleyways and bombed-out buildings. The experience acquainted them with a new iteration of warfare that reflected not only the brutality of modern combat, but also the tenacity of human spirit. Each street corner held stories of valor and grief. The combatants faced dire morale challenges, underscored by the tragic toll of both injured and fallen soldiers. The terrain blurred the lines between victory and defeat, intensifying the psychological strain on those entrusted with maintaining momentum. For every advance made by Allied units, news of casualties, some becoming instantly iconic, like the futile gallantry exhibited by those attempting to breach entrenched positions, reached the troops and their leaders alike. The sense of loss reverberated through their ranks, weaving a narrative of sacrifice into the identity of the campaign. Especially poignant were the experiences of medics, who labored incessantly under the agony of treating soldiers in the field, often operating near the front lines, where artillery shells exploded with devastating frequency. Each medic transformed their section of Normandy into a brutal triage area, embodying courage and compassion while fighting the unpredictability of modern warfare. Days turned into weeks, and while the Allies initially struggled to secure a united front along the coastline, their resolve was buoyed by the successes at Utah Beach and the gradual pressure exerted upon the German lines at Omaha, leading to a hard-fought consolidation of troops and arms. The tactical decision-making was emblematic of coordinated Allied effort. Decision-makers like General Omar Bradley began to employ more robust and aggressive tactics, capitalizing on the fluidity of armored divisions to push deeper into occupied France. Recognizing the need for speed, he coordinated armored operation advancements in conjunction with infantry units, the melding of forces reflecting a modern warfare doctrine that promised adaptability and resilience. By mid-July 1944, the Allies achieved a significant breakthrough with Operation Cobra, the rallying strategic initiative that sought to expand their hold across the French countryside and into German-occupied territory beyond Normandy. With every inch gained, it became obvious that the continuing conflicts would lead to broader implications across the European theater, engaging not only military components, but also those who would observe, study, and remember the human cost of such advancements. The battles fought during this operational phase left an indelible mark on the psyche of the soldiers, marking them as a generation shaped by a war that demanded not only tactical genius, but also unwavering toughness amid adversity. In truth, the D-Day landings were merely the beginning of a long and arduous campaign to liberate Western Europe. The heroism depicted within those nascent moments of combat served as a harbinger of the multifaceted challenges to come, as the Allies wrestled with both the physical terrain and their moral obligations to their fallen. The battle for Normandy unfolded as a saga embedded with strategy, valor, loss, and the unyielding spirit of soldiers who faced grim odds, yet persisted with an indignant determination to crush tyranny and reclaim justice across the continent. The scars of this conflict, marked by lost lives and the costs incurred, would resonate through not just the triumphs claimed, but the tragedy interwoven into the fabric of their legacies, a testament to the unrelenting tide of steel that sought not only territory but also the very essence of humanity's enduring quest for freedom. As the Allies continued their advance through Normandy, the strategic landscape became increasingly complex. German commanders, fortified by their entrenched positions, had initially anticipated a successful defense along the coast. Their belief rested on the notion that fortified bunkers, artillery emplacements, and the formidable Atlantic Wall could repel any invasion force trying to reclaim Europe. However, the reality of the D-Day landings on June 6, 1944, shattered these expectations. It became evident that the Allies had meticulously planned their assault, utilizing not only overwhelming naval and air support, but also deception operations that misled German intelligence regarding the timing and location of the invasion. The consequences of such precise planning manifested in the shock and chaos that befell German troops on that fateful day. In the weeks that followed, the Allies faced a steep learning curve characterized by fierce resistance, harsh environmental conditions, and the daunting task of logistics. A key player in the conflict was General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who, as the supreme commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, orchestrated the complex ballet of military operations. Eisenhower's vision encompassed not only rapid territorial gains, but also the need for strategic sustainability. He faced daunting logistical challenges, including supply line management under enemy fire, which was critical for sustaining operations and maintaining troop morale. The extensive use of mulberry harbors, temporary floating ports designed to facilitate the rapid offloading of supplies, was a revolutionary solution that facilitated the influx of reinforcements and material necessary for the increasing tempo of warfare. Meanwhile, the German response, under the command of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, was one marked by rigidity and over-reliance on static defensive positions. Rommel, known for his earlier successes in North Africa, advocated for a mobile defense to counter the fast-moving Allied armor. However, conflicting directives from higher command overwhelmed Rommel's capacity to implement a cohesive strategy. The delays and discord within the German high command hindered any effective counteroffensive, compounding the disarray that permeated German units in Normandy. In contrast, the Allies exploited the inherent chaos of the German defenses. Operation Cobra was launched in mid-July 1944, a concerted effort aimed at breaking through German lines in a decisive attack that would ensure the liberation of France could proceed unabated. The coordination between air and ground forces was exemplary. Close air support struck at German positions, crippling their ability to respond effectively to the advancing American troops. This approach not only provided the necessary tactical support, but also psychologically weakened German resolve, adding to the prevailing sense that defeat was imminent. But for the soldiers on the front lines, the human cost of such campaigns was staggering. Terrains were littered with remnants of the shattered lives of combatants, and civilians caught in the crossfire faced harrowing realities. Stories emerged from towns such as St. Lo, where the relentless bombardment left cities in ruins and families torn apart. The civilian population, too innocent in their existence, bore witness to the relentless tide of steel as it swept through their lives, often with devastating consequences. Troops reported feeling the burden of their actions, grappling with the loss of civilian lives in a war that demanded much more than they were prepared to give. As the Allied forces penetrated deeper into occupied France, they faced not only the tangible threats posed by German soldiers, but also the psychological burden of the trenches and blood that overshadowed their path. It was a war marked by fleeting moments of camaraderie and moments of profound loneliness and grief. Soldiers found solace in fellow troops, their shared experiences creating bonds that transcended the darkness surrounding them. Letters home revealed a mix of hope and despair, with soldiers relaying tales of triumph intertwined with the devastating losses they had witnessed firsthand. The emotional toll of combat began to manifest among the ranks, hinting at the pervasive trauma that would linger long after the last shot was fired. By late July 1944, the Allies' relentless advance culminated in the liberation of significant towns such as Avranches, a pivotal crossroads that allowed for the full-scale push toward the liberation of Paris. The precision of military tactics stood in stark contrast to the gritty realities of war as troops navigated through remnants of battle. The operation had evolved into a juggernaut, with momentum swinging irreversibly in favor of the Allies. Yet each gain came at a price. Supplies dwindled, and exhaustion began to set in among the troops, a clear testament to the unyielding nature of combat. The fundamental disconnect between the strategic objectives laid out by Allied planners and the chaotic conditions faced by soldiers in the field underscored the fluctuating tide of war. The complexities of urban warfare in cities like St. Lo created a landscape where tactics had to be molded in real time, forcing commanders to adapt continuously. This flexibility marked a shift from conventional warfare concepts to a more fluid understanding of battlefield engagements, hinting at the evolving nature of future conflicts. In the heart of battle, the weapons of war, the tanks, the artillery, the aircraft, were not merely instruments of destruction. They became symbols of hope and liberation. Each advance brought with it both the promise of a liberated Europe and the harrowing reminder of the destruction wrought in the name of freedom. As the Allies pushed towards Paris, the stakes escalated, and so did the sense of urgency to not just secure victories, but to honor the sacrifices made along the way. Men and women stood at the precipice of hope and despair, marked indelibly by the complex tapestry of conflict. The German defenses stiffened, but the Allies had harnessed an ingenuity that came from necessity, a drive to overcome the odds and fulfill the commitment to liberate a continent shackled by fear and oppression. In a critical analysis of these wartime events, it is clear that the battle for Normandy became a microcosm of the wider conflict. The operational dynamics reflected not just on military tactics, but on the broader understanding of human resilience in the face of unimaginable adversity. As the steel tide continued its advance, it carried with it the stories of courage, the scars of war, and the unanswerable questions of morality that would echo through history. A vivid reminder of the costs required to reclaim liberty, and the enduring impact of sacrifice etched forever in the annals of time. In the crucible of combat, the stakes were insurmountably high, as the Allied forces prepared to execute Operation Overlord, an amphibious invasion unprecedented in scale and audacity. German commanders, firmly entrenched in their belief that the Atlantic Wall would hold, had underestimated not only the planning and determination of the Allied High Command, but also the evolving nature of warfare itself. As dawn broke on June 6, 1944, thousands of landing craft surged toward the beaches of Normandy, each carrying soldiers who understood that the day ahead promised bloodshed and chaos. Still, they pressed forward, propelled by a profound sense of duty, camaraderie, and an unyielding hope for liberation. The intricate planning behind D-Day involved meticulous coordination among Allied forces, emblematic of a combined arms approach that sought to maximize effectiveness across land, air, and sea. Intelligence estimates had suggested that around 10,000 German troops were stationed along the coast, but the Allies knew that this figure did not encapsulate the depth of the enemy's defensive capabilities. The Germans had fortified their positions with concrete bunkers, machine gun nests, and artillery emplacements, all emphasized by the mindless terrain of cliffs and beach obstacles like Hedgerow and Cirré. From the outset, Allied forces faced a formidable challenge in breaching these defenses. British and American planners devised a strategy that included extensive aerial bombardments and naval shelling to soften up the German positions before the landings. However, the effectiveness of these operations was mired in complexity. Numerous bombing missions failed to achieve their desired destruction levels, leaving German defenses largely intact and rendering the Allies vulnerable as they disembarked. The initial assaults, particularly at Omaha Beach, became emblematic of the ferocity and unpredictability of combat. Troops from the 29th Division faced withering fire as they landed, struggling against the riptide of the sea and the hail of bullets. Nearly half of the first wave fell, contributing to a staggering human toll that would be a grave marker of the day's events. American commanders, particularly Major General Ruger, had to make immediate and often hasty tactical decisions as the situation unraveled, their previously polished plans now falling victim to the merciless realities of war. The heroic actions of non-commissioned officers, NCOs, emerged in the chaos. Individuals like Tech Sergeant Frank L. Miller led Peers through the firestorm, opting for rapid tactical changes that highlighted the unpredictable nature of ground warfare. The essence of leadership during D-Day was defined not by rank, but by action, courage, and the instinct to adapt, illustrating the human element intricately woven into the fabric of military strategy. Moreover, the Allied strategy transcended combat, incorporating an intricate logistical framework that would prove crucial. As troops landed, an enormous supply chain operated tirelessly in the background. The Red Ball Express, created rapidly to support armor and infantry, utilized trucks to deliver necessary supplies from the beaches directly to the front lines. This logistics initiative, established with forethought and urgency, ensured that fighters remained supplied with food, munitions, and medical supplies, creating a lifeline amid the chaos. However, the challenges of maintaining supply lines across rough terrain were formidable. With roads often under enemy fire or rife with obstacles, adept navigation became a necessary skill, one that could pivot the tide of battle. The challenge was immense, but the Allies learned quickly, adjusting their supply strategies to ensure resilience under pressure. As the days following D-Day unfolded, the battle for Normandy devolved into a complex and drawn-out fight for territory, characterized by brutal engagements in towns such as Carentan and Saint-Lô. The Allies sought not just to consolidate their positions, but also to secure vital routes that would facilitate their advance deeper into occupied territories. It became evident that the fight would not be won solely on the beaches. Rather, the struggle would extend into urban environments where the German Wehrmacht, fortified and often bolstered by local reinforcements, could exploit the familiar landscape to significant tactical advantage. German commanders demonstrated an early proficiency for conducting defensive operations in urban settings. The Wehrmacht often employed a tactic known as defense in depth, where they would fall back from an initial defensive line to more fortified secondary positions, a strategy designed to draw the Allies into an unyielding meat grinder of attrition warfare. Within the ancient streets of Bayeux and the fields of the Cotentin Peninsula, they sought to inflict maximum casualties, leveraging their knowledge of the terrain. The tactical response of the Allies required continuous adaptation. As front lines shifted, so too did their approaches. Coordination between British forces, including General Montgomery's 21st Army Group, and American units evolved into a dynamic system of shared intelligence and cooperation, an endeavor that further emphasized the complexities of coalition warfare. The human element cannot be understated in these heated engagements. The cacophony of gunfire and the cries of the wounded served as constant reminders of the conflict's brutality. Soldiers faced incessant fear and loss as they fought not just for land, but for the lives of their comrades beside them. Personal narratives, often captured in the hastily scrawled letters to loved ones or hastily delivered reports back to command, underscored the emotional toll taken by these engagements. The battle-scarred faces of soldiers told a story that statistics alone could not capture. Harrowing experiences were forged in the flames and blood of combat. Stories of gallantry intermixed with loss created a fabric of resilience, binding men and women through unthinkable experiences that spanned from fear to camaraderie, from hope to despair. Despite the relentless fight and the staggering human cost, the Allies began to adjust their strategies, adapting not only their tactics, but also their perceptions of the enemy. The battle for Normandy shaped a new understanding of warfare, underscoring its complexities amid brutal human realities. The terrain itself became a silent witness to the evolving strategies, as both sides rearranged their plans in response to the unpredictable nature of combat. The tide had initially deemed it erratic, but as American forces stormed inland, they revealed an insatiable drive to push forward, defying the German commanders' expectations. Ultimately, the Normandy campaign evolved into a testament of human resolve and strategic adaptation as both sides fought against the winds of fate. German commanders, despite their formidable defenses and tactical expertise, faced an adversary who had rewritten the rules of engagement, blending logistics with human resilience into a unified effort that challenged conventional military doctrines. The streets of Normandy, steeped in history and now echoing with the sounds of combat, bore witness not only to military operations, but also to the indomitable spirit of those who fought, a narrative etched forever in the annals of World War II. Each decision in the heat of conflict, every adaptation to unforeseen circumstances, and the ever-persistent cost of war intertwined to create an epic saga that defined the very essence of the struggle for Europe's liberation, illustrating poignantly that even in the depths of despair, hope can burgeon in the most unexpected ways. The steel tide, resolute and unyielding, surged toward its ultimate goal, liberation from tyranny, driven by the very heart and soul of those who dared to dream of a free world.